Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to be here with you to engage in this webinar on focal students working towards equity in the classroom. We are honored and humbled that we had over 400 people sign up for this webinar. Really appreciate your taking the time out either now or when you receive this later on, which you will, to take in some learning and actually hopefully offer your own thoughts about some of what we're exploring about using focal students as an equity approach in the classroom. So thank you for being here. Want to start just by offering a brief introduction to who you're with over this hour. My name is Colin Davis, and I have worked with the National Equity Project since 2004, primarily as a coach of teachers and leaders across a variety of contexts, all working to achieve equity in their classroom, in their school or district in a more effective way. So we partner with people shoulder to shoulder to try to understand what they're facing and find new approaches to that. That has often included focal student inquiry work, where we guide individuals and teams to learn deeply from focal students to inform their teaching practice as well as some of their school practices as well. So this is an area we feel very passionately about and have experience in and also continue to learn from teachers doing the work. Just very briefly, I'll also say my work began in education at a small alternative public high school in New York City back in 1995. And that experience of working with students who had come into the school after being dropped out, being kicked out of other programs, really sharpened my lens about what it might mean to get to know students really deeply and learn from that to improve pedagogy and improve school experiences. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to my buddy, Mark Salinas.
Good afternoon and early evening to some of you all. Again, my name is Mark Salinas, and I started here at the National Equity Project in 2002. And over the last decade and some change, I've had the opportunity to partner with Colin around the work he described that we do on a daily basis in schools, districts, and organizations to keep a focus on equity. Prior to coming here to the National Equity Project, I spent a couple of years co-directing, teaching, and leading summer school programs in New Orleans and San Rafael, California, here in the Bay Area, really focusing on some of the needs of students who during the year-round school were having challenging times. And so the summer was an opportunity to get in close with students and support them to invest more into their learning. And from there, I then decided, yes, I want to be a classroom teacher. After doing summer programs, I said, I want to do this all the time year round. And so then I got myself into a credential program, became a high school teacher, mainly in 9th and 10th grade, and spent a lot of my time not only just teaching, but really working with interdisciplinary teams to figure out how to wrap ourselves around students, in particular students furthest from opportunity, so we can kind of figure out what we needed to shift and change in our school environment to meet their needs. And so I have a lot of energy and passion around this work of focal students. At that time, I didn't call them focal students. It was just the students who were puzzles that we were trying to get close to understand how they could teach us better.
All right, so it's a little bit about us. For the rest of this webinar, we're actually going to stop the video so you can focus on the slides and the content. And we want to just take a moment to make sure people have a sense of where we're coming from. So we're guessing that many of you are new to the National Equity Project. We are a nonprofit leadership development and organizational development group, been around for over 20 years. And you'll see our mission there on the slide about transforming the achievement, experiences, and life trajectory of children and families who have been historically underserved. So we offer a variety of services and partner with people to work towards that in many, many ways. And we want to really ensure that in our partnership, we're opening up new opportunities for those who have not gotten what they deserved. So as we think about this idea of focal students in particular, and throughout our work at the National Equity Project, we want to be clear about what we mean by equity. And for us, that just simply means that every learner can receive what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. really at the core of this is really how do we ensure that every young person can thrive, tapping into their genius, to their assets, as a way of ensuring they have opportunities available to them, particularly for those who our systems have not been designed to serve. So that's really what is at the core of this work of Focal Students, learning from a few students and applying that to ensure that everyone is getting what they need to thrive. So a little just overview of what we're up to today. You'll see in just a moment, we're starting with a touch on just connecting to the power of educators and the relationship between teacher and student as a way of kind of getting our work started about thinking about what it means to work with focal students. Have a few words about how and why we might work with focal students as an equity approach in particular. And then we're going to have a little time to offer what we call the Learning Partnership Framework. And that is something that we've developed drawing from the expertise and work of Zaretta Hammond, who wrote Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And we'll offer that framework really as a guide to what we might pay attention to, what we might work on, what we might learn about focal students in particular to be able to be more successful with them. How do we partner with them most deeply? And finally, a spotlight on one piece of that framework on student mindsets. Throughout, we're going to have some opportunities for you to reflect, to jot down some thoughts to yourself on a Post-it. We'll have a poll to get a sense of what's resonating with you, a couple of different chats to hear your voices, and of course some question and answers, especially at the end. We want to say that you will be getting the slides from this webinar as well as the full recording, the transcript of the chat. So we really want to encourage you to engage in the chat so people can learn from one another in this webinar. And finally, that you'll get a couple of resources connected to the content we're offering. So if that sounds okay to you, we're gonna keep it moving. And we're gonna start with a video that we wanna offer just as a way of connecting to the importance of the relationship between teacher and student and the idea of what a partnership can look and feel like. So take a look at this, see what you think.
Hi, I'm Mr. Ballou, Coach Ballou.
My name is Mrs. Hall.
My name is Mr. Smith.
Soy Melissa Soto.
My name is Miss Coy. You never turn it off. We become a family, and they are my kids.
I've been called a lot of things from the mouths of 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds.
I also tell them, sometimes you're in school longer than you're actually at home.
Yeah.
And I tell them the same thing. I spend more time with you than I spend with my own family.
When I get into this space where it's like they're my kids, and then if they make a mistake, which they will do, I get doubtful, like, am I making a difference?
You have those times where you kind of wonder, why am I exerting all this energy and this effort? And I did get that doubt sometimes.
I don't know any teacher in my life that made a difference in which I go, that was a great lesson. I think about the ones that made a difference to me as a person. And so when they mess up, the perfectionist in me takes it very personal.
Give me 1 second.
All right.
What? Are you kidding me?
Oh, snap. A to the J.
Dear Miss Coy, I came into 5th grade as a shy girl who especially struggled with talking in front of people.
You took an interest in the things that were important to me, always asking about my family and showing interest in my love for baseball.
Because of your teaching, you have inspired me to do whatever my passion is when I grow up.
Winning at all costs, that's every coach's motto. What made you more unique was that you didn't care about the wins. You wanted us to be better individuals day by day.
I remember whenever I got stuck in a problem and I thought I just couldn't do it, you said, it's not that I couldn't do it, I just couldn't do it yet.
Tú eres mi favorito, maestra, pero yo sé que hablas inglés.
Thank you for making the past year great, and I can't wait to spend the next 8 months with you.
Thanks for being the man and for being a great teacher. Your boy, A to the J.
A to the J.
Thank you for making me a better person, and thank you for never giving up on me and helping me become the man I am today. Love, Daniel.
Hey, Coach.
What's up, Coach? We appreciate your dedication and effort you put towards us. We thank you for not just making us better basketball players, but better men. This is for you.
Thank you, Coach.
My gosh, man.
Good to see you.
Congratulations.
Oh.
So proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Family on three. 1, 2, 3. Family. There you go.
We wanted to offer that just as a way of having a little vision of what that teacher-student partnership can look like and the power that that has on people. It still gets to me.
Yes,
seen that a few times.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to encourage you to think about who that person might have been in your life, that educator when you were a student, just to reflect to yourself, thinking about who was able to get into more of a deep partnership to know the whole person and connect in a way that really affected your sense of who you are and what's possible in the world. Take a moment, if you would, just to bring that person to mind. And Mark Salinas, you want to say anything about who that is for you?
Yes, that would be Mrs. Hazel Harris, Lincoln High counselor, held me through the 80s. That's who that person is.
And then for myself, actually, the person who comes most to mind is a college professor, Maria Lugones, who just kind of both blew open my mind about the way the world works and also saw me as someone who had a role to play in making the world a better place. And I found some agency in that, which affected my whole trajectory of what came after. So whoever that was for you, want to connect you to that and start thinking about what it means for us to be that for those young people in our care, especially those who may not yet be where we want them to be, and what it might mean to be that person to a focal student. With that.
And for this next piece, we want to take a minute to think about equity in practice. And so as this is an intro to focal students and equity in the classroom, we would say it starts with putting it in practice and starting with a stance. And that means for us as educators to have a learner stance. And we would say at least that when you're in this stance, you're also looking at how bias might be at play, how some inequitable practices that we may be doing, not intentionally, but unintentionally having certain impacts on young people. We would say that learner stance is about trying to understand what it takes to create inclusive environments. We haven't figured it out yet. What does it take to create a community where students feel like they belong? Now, we are all doing some good things in our class, and I'm sure working for a lot of students, but it's always a stance to say, who is it not working for, and what do I need to figure out and learn more about? And lastly, we think this work, to put it into practice, is about discovering and cultivating unique gifts, talents that every young person has. It's really an asset approach. And the only way you can discover and cultivate is you have to lean in, you have to get close to, and you have to learn some stuff. And so how do you do that? We would say, a focal student approach allows you to do that, to get in close with students and to get to know them as learners, as people, as thinkers, in all their complexity. And so we want to just say, at a macro level, like why focal students? And we know that focal students isn't anything new, but folks have different approaches to it, and we want to just be explicit and clear around this is an instructional change strategy. It's a professional learning strategy. It's not just picking randomly a few students. It's actually taking a stance saying, I need to get in close and learn about some students more deeply to understand what I need to learn how to do better, what I need to consider, and how do I actually support students to become more independent learners and more aware of themselves as learners. And so you pick students that you actually want to do some intentional work around with a learner stance. And it's all in service of being able to apply that to larger groups of students, either with similar challenges, needs, or learning how to more personalize and differentiate in the classroom. But it still starts from, I have to learn who my students are, and that approach is something that you can do with all students. And so at its core, again, it's about that learner stance to do something with a couple of students so you can then, again, apply that larger and really have a stance around your instructional decision-making and a stance around understanding how outcomes and experiences are tied to what we as teachers put in place in our classrooms. And that's the technical routines to the conditions and relationships and trust that lead to a sense of a belonging. And again, the best source of that is the students in our classroom. They will teach us and tell us what they need.
So we've used this approach frequently, and again, some of it also is just as simple as we know teachers, as former teachers ourselves, just are overwhelmed by the needs of everything we have to do, what's on our shoulders, and sometimes we have 150 students on our rosters. So starting with a few is actually also just a way to make a sustainable approach to start to say, if I learn from a few students and then can apply that, what might happen for the success I see in my classroom? So we want to actually encourage each of you on this webinar to practice that a little bit, to actually bring a student to mind. We are guessing that many of you are teachers yourselves, but whether or not you're a teacher, an administrator, or connected to schools in some other way, we are trusting that you are in contact with young people in schools and want to ask you to bring a particular student to mind, someone you have a sense that you want to reach more effectively, someone you may have some concerns about if they're getting what they need to acquire essential skills, to open up some opportunities for them, someone you want to be more successful with, or you want to see succeed in an academic and school environment in a different way. So if you could just bring one particular student in mind, we find that can be helpful to anchor what we're going to offer next, to connect to that one student. Take a moment, just jot down that person if you would, or bring them to your mind. All right, holding on to who that person is, we want to see how what we're offering next might bring some insights into what's happening with that student or your work with that student. So we're going to offer what we call the Learning Partnership Framework, and there's an overarching metaphor that we use that is infused in this framework, which is the metaphor of window and mirror. This is adapted from the work of Emily Stile, this metaphor of the idea of we needing to ensure that we are looking out the window and getting clear about what's out there. In this case, what's out there happening with this particular student? How can I learn more about who they are, the context they're in, what's going on with this situation of my work with them? And in addition to looking out the window, we want to ensure that we're also looking in the mirror to gain insights into who I am, how the ways I have been shaped are actually informing my work with this student. And the bridge here, the Learning Partnership Bridge, is the idea of how do we connect what's out there looking out the window and what's happening for me in a way that actually can inform my instructional practice. So we're going to use this metaphor as we go into some of the domains that the Learning Partnership Framework goes into. This is a framework that we're going to offer to you. This is one of the key resources we'll offer as a follow-up resource. We're going to give you just some introductory ideas for you to chew on now, and then you'll be able to go in a little deeper after the webinar is over. All right, the Learning Partnership Framework, again, drawing from the work of Zaretta Hammond, we're looking at how to get in partnership between educators and students in a way that actually attends to 3 different domains that affect teaching and learning: identity, mindset, and skills. What we found is that often when we're talking about students who are not yet successful in schools, many of us engage in conversation directly on skills, and sometimes exclusively, about where they at, what do they need, where are their skill gaps, and that is an essential conversation. And we would say it's not sufficient, especially as we're working towards equity in the classroom. We want to ensure that we are attending to the ways identity and mindset are playing out in our work with students. So that's both about, in terms of the student themselves, what do we know about their identity their current mindsets and their skill sets, but also for ourselves. How are our identities impacting our relationship with students? How are our mindsets impacting our work together with those students? And what are the skills we have and we need as educators? So that's the general framing, and we want to dig in one by one to each of these domains. So first we have the domain of identity. And essentially that is really the question of who am I in the world? As we think about looking out the window at the student, what do we know about how the student sees themselves as a whole person? All of the elements of their identity that matter to them, not just what we think we know, but what matters to them. How do they see themselves in terms of their racial identity, gender identity, in terms of their family, the culture that they feel connected to, the language they speak at home, the neighborhood they grow up in. There are a variety of different factors that actually matter a lot to the students we're trying to serve, and we want to understand more about that to be able to understand better how we can connect the learning to them and we can work together. We also want to really consider about who are we as educators? How have our identities, the various identities that we hold, shaped who we are and the way that we relate to people? How does that impact the level of trust between us as teachers and that student? And how might we actually build some trust or strengthen more trust between us and our focal student? So the bridge question, as we're thinking about the student identity, the teacher identity, the educator-student bridge, is really about how might this student experience me, given who I am and given how they see me? How can I build trust across our identities, both in terms of similarities and across our different identities? What we know to be true, especially when we're talking about students with a history of not finding success in schools or not getting their needs met in school systems, is that often there's a real gap in trust. And so we would offer that these reflections about how our identities impact our relationship and how we build trust across those identity differences are really essential foundations for partnering with students meaningfully as we work with focal students. So that's the general overview of identity, how in that domain. The next one we want to attend to, we want to just again give you a little gist about each one and then give you a chance to do some question and answer. The next one is mindset. And one of the key questions for mindset is, what beliefs am I holding about my ability to succeed and about others' ability to succeed? So again, as we think about what's happening for the student, what do we know about the beliefs they're holding about what's possible for them in this classroom, in this school, as learners? What do we know about certain mindsets that we know connect to a sense of persistence and actually making progress in challenging learning that are needed for students? For example, the mindset of, does this student have a true sense of belonging in this academic community? Do they feel like their contributions matter academically as well as socially? Do they have a sense that the work we're doing in class actually has value for me? Is that a mindset they're holding? If not, how might we actually build that mindset? Do they have a sense that success is possible in this class, in school overall? Whatever they're holding as a mindset relation to that is going to impact their willingness to engage or not with us in a partnership and with their learning. So thinking about those mindsets of, is success possible? How does effort connect to success in learning? What are they holding in their minds, and how might we develop more positive academic mindsets that they might need to succeed? That's just the window work. Of course, we also need to look in the mirror. So for us, what beliefs are we holding about this student's ability to succeed? And this is both conscious and unconscious. So the mindset domain is really a very expansive domain where there's a lot to go into. So this is the realm of unconscious bias, where we might be consciously thinking, sure, the students can succeed, I believe that, but then in our interactions with them, the way that we interpret what they do, in our decisions of how we respond to their behavior, we might not actually be living that belief fully. So this is the area where we need to really explore, what mindset am I holding about what's possible for this student and for me? Do I believe that I can actually serve the student well? How might I develop the mindsets needed for success? How might I and we develop those mindsets, both for the student and also for myself? Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. So we have one more domain and then we'll get into some more question and answer. Hopefully this is giving you some things to chew on, and we'll have some chat in just a moment. So the final domain, the third domain, is skills, and this is one that is more commonly engaged in, about what are the current strengths and needs in terms of skills. In the learning partnership framework, we do want to start with those assets, about tapping into those and building on those and ensuring that the student sees their own strengths, academic strengths, social strengths, those that are going to help them succeed, and that we get really clear about what the needs are. So as we're thinking about that, we want to be thinking about how can both the student and the teacher build on those strengths, and both of us get clearer about what's needed to achieve the next essential skills. Very often in our experience, students who are below grade level or struggling in some way, many teachers are hesitant to be clear with the student about exactly where their skills are and exactly where they need to go, because they feel like it might be discouraging. And while we understand that impulse, we would say it's essential that the trust has been built through that work across identities and through that work developing those kind of mindsets, where actually the very clear reality of where the student is and the path they need to get on to be able to reach the next skills that they need is clear to both student and teacher. This is about really getting the student to own their learning, but it's founded on the kind of trust that was built across those identity differences and the mindsets that we've supported, where they can see, even if I'm far behind where maybe the grade level standard is, I can see that success is possible. My teacher is doing some things with me to help me see where I've been successful before and how I might actually get on this path to work on this essential learning. So I'm going to pause there and just give you a chance to offer any clarifying questions, any initial responses to the learning partnership framework. Again, there's more to this, but we wanted to give a general overview and then give you the full framework itself and some related materials as a follow-up after this webinar. So if you would, we're going to invite you to click on that chat icon. And when you do that, please ensure that you're chatting with both panelists and attendees so that everyone who's on the webinar can see those questions. You might actually have some connections about resources that this reminded you of, or tools. So please go ahead and chat initial connections, responses, and questions, and we'll start to see where we got.
Thank you, Juan. I like the question here around the role of parents and how parent engagement looks around something like this, and really thinking about how we want to ensure that our intentions are getting, around getting closer to some students are not misinterpreted, right?
Mm-hmm. Jillian offers, how many focal students do you recommend for this work? And I don't think there's one clear answer to that. From my own experience, I would say that probably no more than 5 is a good place to start. Sometimes literally working with teachers, we're saying, you're feeling pretty overwhelmed, let's start with 1. Who do you want to learn more about and actually get in a little deeper with? And then we can see where we go from there. But anything more than a handful of students starts to be difficult to kind of ask the kind of questions and get a little bit deeper into the kind of learning about identity and mindset and skills that we want to get to be able to apply to more students. Yeah. Both.
I love the question around how do we get teachers to internalize these practices? One thing we've learned is you start small. We've actually oftentimes started with small teams and small groups. And really, when those teachers kind of share their stories around how it's informed their practice, whether or not we do some fish bowls and ways for them to lift up their learning. And in particular, when they can do it in ways where they've integrated it into the classroom. So it's not seen as a more, I have to do, but actually how am I intentionally paying attention to my focal students? And then again, what is it informing me around my instructional decision-making or my classroom routines? And this is where we think it creates the ripple through schools and through other folks taking it up when they actually see that it works, meaning that it works, meaning is that it helps teachers get incredible new insights. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to magically turn into success for every student in the classroom, but they see it as an approach that actually helps them navigate their not knowing.
A couple of questions here about how do we choose or criteria for focal students, and we would say a couple of things. One is any student you choose you can learn from, and as an equity strategy, we would say it's important to start to learn about and identify the patterns in your classroom, the patterns of what types of students, both in terms of identity factors like race and gender, but also in terms of characteristics, the way they kind of show up in class, tend to be successful and who tends to have a bit more trouble in your class or in your school. So trying to choose some students who represent perhaps a pattern of students who are not yet successful in your class is a place to begin. And appreciate one of the comments here about wanting to make sure that we don't just go to stereotypes about, I have one Latinx student and I'm going to just learn from them and then apply that to all of our Latino or Latina students. That, again, we want to make sure we are doing this in a way that's actually developing a practice in teachers. That's not saying if I have this student, then that will definitely apply to all. But what can I learn that could apply to other students? And then how do I actually begin to build that practice of just becoming, ultimately this is about becoming more of a responsive teacher and starting to hear patterns of what students who are not successful, who they are and what they need. How does that shift our practices? So we definitely are trying to shy away from or avoid any sense of we're doing the checklist of how do we serve this type of student, that type of student, but starting with a sense of where are the patterns of who's not yet successful, picking a few students, learning from them and applying that learning overall to their class, and then continuing to dig into relationships with other students.
I appreciate Alexandria writing a comment around important for white educators to understand who they are, understand acknowledged biases, and how students of color may not trust them based on history, school, et cetera, and so on. And I remember when I was teaching in high school in San Francisco, my African-American students, and I went to school in San Francisco, I'm African-American, and I went to school with white students, and they say, hey, Salinas, what were white kids like? And so they were curious about white people, which I couldn't understand when I was a first-year teacher, first couple of years. And what they would say is that the only white people we know are ones that give us orders, tell us what to do, right? And so we have no relationships with white people. So why should we trust them, right? When we don't even know them. And so it was profound when I was sharing that with other folks who actually just made assumptions about, because I show up every day in this community and I'm white, that you should trust me. And so, yeah, a lot of learning around that. And I would say it even goes to the extent of times when I actually myself had to couldn't make any assumptions about working with my Latino students and other subgroups just because I was a person of color. That doesn't give me a pass to be able to kind of work in Latinx communities. I still have to learn, show up with some level of respect and be humble that if they actually don't trust me, because they might think you just here, well, actually not just here. I've had this said to me before. It's like, well, you're here really just trying to look at what's best for Black people, right? Because it had experiences of that. And so their experience is not up for debate. So I had to believe that. So I had to figure out what it takes for me to earn some trust. And it starts with listening and believing people when they say this has been our experience. But not feeling guilty, not feeling sympathy, but it's a stance to say, if I'm in this community, I got to do my work about why I'm actually choosing to work in this environment, given who I am. That's the mirror work for me in another context when working cross-race, cross-culture.
All right, we wish we could go into every one of these questions. They're fantastic. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but we want to keep going. We do want to say there are a couple of questions about how to systematize this. And one thing we would say is that we encourage people to start with teachers who are actually interested and open to doing this work as a way of learning from that and then sharing some of that learning with others. This is a framework we use for coaches, instructional coaches, or principals who are coaching teachers that can support deepening that work. There are a lot of different ways that this could look, but we want to encourage you to start small to go big, both in terms of how the learning from a few students can apply to instructional practices of how do I get to know my students' identities more as a whole? How do I learn more about mindsets as a whole and actually develop a way of teaching that cultivates certain mindsets, for example? And then also that Learn and Connect go up to the school level of literally what kind of assessments we might want to have to learn more about students' experience, for example. What kind of a variety of other things that could actually apply to not just the classroom. So lots more to say about that, but we're going to keep this moving and actually ask you, given what you've heard so far about the domains of identity, mindset, and skills, reconnect to the student that you brought to mind earlier, that student you want to be more successful with, and actually just think about which of these domains might you want to learn more about in terms of this student you brought to mind, or might you want to pay more attention to. Again, maybe it's not a current student, so this could be a question about what do you wish you might have explored a little bit more. And this could be a domain of I want to actually think about how my identity was impacting that relationship. Or I want to learn more about who they are, how they saw themselves in identity. Or for mindset, I want to really dig into what they believed about themselves, or what I was believing about them or me. Or again, the same for skills. Wish I had gotten more specific about where their skill assets were and helped them see that, or been clear about where my skills need to be. So we're going to have a little poll and encourage you to take a look. As you think about that student you brought to mind, which domain might you want to learn more about, pay more attention to, that might support increased effective work with that student? Identity, mindset, or skills? All right. The numbers are still coming in. We got a small number, about 11% right now, who are talking about skills, and maybe I need to get clear about that. And then the biggest winner at this it's not a winner, it's not a win-lose game, but that is about mindset. Really, we don't know exactly what you're thinking, but hopefully thinking about what is that student holding about their own mindset, and maybe exploring more about my own mindset, perhaps getting in the way of work. But again, 34% identity, 53% mindset right now. Thank you for that. No right or wrong answer. You know yourselves and the students that you're thinking about best, but appreciate that just to get a little pulse check about what's resonating or what people might want to look into more. All right. With that, we want to, bam, there we go. Spotlight on that mindset.
And so we picked a good spotlight because that also is one that kind of came up and was lifted up. And it's pretty common that we see in school environments that resonates a lot with folks. And so this next piece is to just spotlight a few aspects of the framework. And again, right here, what you're seeing right here is a screenshot of a document that we will make available to you that'll take each of the 3 domains and have the bridge included in there. So it has the student mindset, educator mindset. The larger document will have the identity from student to educator and the skill, and a couple sub-bullets for you to consider. So as we spotlight this, I want to say a word about this, that mindsets matter, right? And as we know, and people say, yeah, I get it, but to really get then specific about what mindsets are we paying attention to for ourselves and for young people. And some of these sub-bullets, I'll start on the left-hand side around student mindset. This comes from some work at the University of Chicago where they actually pulled together a lot of research on looking at non-cognitive factors that support perseverance around academic outcomes. And so looking at work has value, I'm going to start from the bottom up in terms of a sense of relevance and purpose, right? Student mindsets around academics. Thinking about belief that success is possible. So this is around that self-efficacy, that my effort leads to increased ability. And so thinking of growth mindset, some of Carol Dweck's work. I always like to say this to my 2 boys that I have: practice makes permanent, not perfect, but permanent. And so how to really put out messages around I'm practicing this and putting the effort in to have some permanence around what I'm practicing, right? And so that has to be a message and has to be a mindset that I'm not just doing my work. And then a sense of belonging around this, do I belong in this academic community? And so these are stories that young people tell themselves around their capacity to learn and engage, and do I have the capacity? And so again, this comes from some work at the University of Chicago. We'll maybe put a 1 or 2 pager in on that and share a couple readings that blow out a little bit more of what it looks like. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about what it looks like in action, maybe to do some work around that. And on the right-hand side, around the educator mindset. And as Colin was talking a little bit around this third bullet around implicit bias, and there's some good work coming out of the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State, and a lot of emergent work in all areas and fields, but in particular around education, trying to understand the impact of unconscious bias in our perceptions of young people and our interactions and our planning, from our curricular choices to an incident happens in my class, right? And so how do we slow ourselves down and pause and practice some of the stuff that's emerging in schools, which we see a lot of mindfulness happening for young people, which is beautiful around social emotional learning, but not as much for the adults around that mindfulness. And it's not about just finding the right curriculum. Sometimes that's a good start, but there's some practices we can put in place that slow us down to really be thinking about how my mindset is impacting some of the students that are furthest from opportunity that I'm getting close in with. So I want to now go into just a little deeper into spotlighting a piece around students. So one might be around how we might recognize mindsets during some challenging or rigorous tasks. And so again, this is why getting in close is so important, because you're listening for self-talk. So what does the student say when they're challenged, when they hit a barrier, when they hit a bump in the road? And so you want to, in many ways, and I've supported teachers to do this many times, it's really like with a clipboard or some kind of way to track it without being so obvious, but really almost quoting exactly what the student says when they hit the roadblock, when they hit the ditch in the road. You're trying to listen for some of their self-talk that is, showing up as a manifestation around some things around their mindset. Now, I put fixed in quotations, not to just say that we have kids who have fixed mindset or growth mindsets, although some people can make an argument of that. I would say at different times you see fixedness show up, and certain times you see that with that same students, a growth mindset around some stuff. So we do have to be careful in our labeling, but you're listening for where it's fixed and some of the self-talk the student's saying. And so you got to get in close and listen for it. And sometimes ask a question to help the student reveal some of the self-talk that is invisible or we can't hear, but get them to verbalize it. And more importantly, supporting a student to be able to know that that exists. So this is where getting in close with them, not parroting back to them, here you're saying this thing, stop saying it, but hey, are you aware, right? And so supporting students, and this could be class-wide or just, again, with some focal students, if you create an environment in your class where you're doing this, then you can actually help students start to say, let me try and recognize some of my own self-talk, and let me rewrite a new narrative of what I might say when I do that. So the first step is to help students to see that they're doing it and to normalize it. And how about you even share your own self-talk around things around teaching where you get stuck? So you normalize it for students and not just make it like there's a problem here, but that we all do some of this and how it matters. And so how to make, a student aware of that, and then support them to have some positive or growth mindset language. And so literally it's almost writing a script, writing a couple quotes or phrases. And now on the teacher side. So that's just one example. And we'll give you some resources with a couple other activities or things to think about around engaging students around some mindset. On the educator side, and this is back to this piece around being mindful, pausing, reflecting, and being intentional about being present in what's happening. There's a kind of protocol we'll share that has a few steps, and this comes from an article, Mindful Reflections as a Process for Developing Culturally Responsive Practices by Barbara Dre and Deborah Winofsky. And it's a couple-step process that when there's incidents that happen in the classroom or outside the classroom, it forces the educator to pause for a minute and really take a minute to just, like, what just happened, and really objectively describe it. And pause for a minute to actually get mindful around what are some values and beliefs and things that are kind of coming up for you around more, what's real important to say is that what have you assigned to why this is happening? You've interpreted something. And then we then start to then put a value on that. And this is where some of our cultural biases and implicit biases come in, because we see those incidents through our own cultural references to where we sort it as good behavior, bad behavior, when we look at an incident. So it pauses to slow down to do a check And then really then you can go deeper around what are some assumptions I'm making around that, what I'm seeing in that incident. And so if it's around behavior, sometimes even rewording behavior to saying these are behavioral displays and it's a manifestation of something. So even by doing that, it pauses you to say, I want to learn some more and understand a little bit more what might be at play, because that's not who that young person is or who that teen is. So another step is to continue to challenge our assumptions to lead us to possible more inquiry, more possible expanding responses and ways in which we may be thinking about this, which is that last bullet. So again, we'll give you the tool, but it's a process to really slow us down in our busyness. Instead of saying, here's this thing happened, this is what you did, this is why it's wrong, and this is what you need to do to fix it, right? And when we are picking some focal students where we can practice that and really try to practice slowing down with a couple of students more intentionally, we build more muscle how to do that. And again, this is where, back to why focal students, we expand our skill and our ability to do that more with more students. But the focal students gives us opportunities to practice. So I'll leave it at that. Again, a couple tools and a few things we will offer you to try on and build out. And with that being said, I want to then say, well, where are there some opportunities? Because people always say, well, this sounds like more work, Mark and Colin. Don't you see how busy we are? How we have time to actually connect with all these focal students? And it might just be 2 or 3 or 1 to get started. We would say start in the classroom. And I'm going to give a couple examples. And again, we'll give a resource that goes more in a little bit more in detail around a couple offerings I'm going to offer you now. And so just first start with some images as you see some adults side by side, inside and outside of the classroom, individually, sometimes in groups. And I want to give you just a few ways that we've supported folks, and more than just this, but thinking about how during independent work time, which we all as educators get in close with students during independent work time. And so how are we also using some of that independent time to listen a little bit more, observe a little bit more, get curious around why they're making choices that they're making, and trying to pay attention to what they say in response to the questions we ask them that reveal more things around, say, their mindset or who they are as a person, around their identity, and how aware are they of misconceptions in particular. So you can go to any of those 3 domains and ask questions that reveal some understanding. And again, same in group time, as you may be working with a group, but you're really at the side of your eyes paying attention to what's going on for that focal student for a minute as they're interacting with their peers. Because sometimes it's around what's the student's mindset around their own perceptions of, like, I don't want to appear to know something and be smart because X, Y, Z, people might perceive this about me. So you're trying to play out, you're trying to pay attention to even the social dynamics as our students are in groups. And so some of the others, like conference periods, recess and lunch, obviously, again, some of the same strategies. As you're in dialogue, you're trying to be intentional about, and not just quizzing them and doing an interview, but really trying to make it around the learning experiences. Do Now is another great place where we've seen some great work that classroom teachers have included questions in there that actually try to get students more meta around some things, or opening routines and paying attention to what comes up for focals, and some interactive journals where you can interact around content and slip in some noticings, slip in some questions that they actually have to reflect back to you a couple things. And last, we see Think, Pair, Share is happening in every classroom. All kinds of opportunities for students to pair up. When's the last time you said, I'm going to join the Pair Share? And actually, you just maybe stealth-wise, you kind of get and you sit right across from your focal student. You might do that with other students too, but when you have that time with that focal student, what might be what you're listening for, or how might you be building a little bit more rapport to get in closer versus standing up and directing the Think, Pair, Shares. And we can add 5 or 10 more things to that, and I'm sure you can brainstorm some other ways to integrate it in to the classroom. So with that, those will be the last couple things we want to offer before we open up for a little bit more question and response, and to leave you with a few considerations for staying connected with us.
All right. So we've got a just about 10 minutes left, and we want to hear a little bit more from you with some questions and responses. And we can start with some that we didn't get to before, but keep them coming, and we'll see what we can get to in the next few minutes. A couple of different chat comments have been about the issue of mindset and how to actually, especially for students who have been told, have been given negative messages about their own ability, that how to shift that mindset. And so Mark gave you one example of support, being in relationship with student enough to support some growth mindset kind of self-talk. That's one option. That's one possibility. There are other things that we can do. I mean, we've worked with teachers using focal student strategy, where literally they've said, I'm learning that in whole group, the way I'm responding to students' comments, and especially when they make a mistake, is actually shutting some students down. And so literally changing a practice for the whole class about how we respond to mistakes. When a student gives a wrong answer, as opposed to saying, not quite, who can help them, which is a very common response, saying, tell us why you think that. Guide us through your thinking, and actually being curious about the way that they think. And then asking other students, who agrees? How many of you agree? How many of you disagree? And actually giving practices where people get curious about one another's learning and can start to see even the student who gave the right answer shares a little bit of how they got there. And it both increases the learning and can support students to feel like they have something to contribute even if they don't know the final answer. That it's about engaging in thinking together. Another practice, just very briefly, is helping students see where they've been successful. So looking at those areas where they have grown and actually working with them to talk through, how have you gotten better at something? What did you do to get there? How can we apply some of those strategies to what else is possible? A lot of this comes from that trusting relationship where the student feels a teacher saying, I see you. I see who you are. I believe in you. I can see you succeeding at high levels, and we're going to partner together to find ways where you start to believe that too. Anything you saw in there you want to respond to?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a couple that came up around parents and working with parents. And I would say parents will offer some incredible insights on our young people. And I think one thing I would say also is that we also have to apply the same learning partnership domains, and particularly mindset and identity, around when we're communicating with parents and the assumptions we make about what is parent involvement, how much the parent cares, and this, that, whatever. So a lot of assumptions get made in our phone calls and our interactions. But I would say one of the most important things I found is that you got to build that trust with the parents. And a key way you build trust with parents, you got to show you know their child, right? Not just this is like, because they know the grades, right? You can share all the stuff academically about them, and they may not know half of that, or they may know a lot, depending on the system you have in your schools. But basically, when you just know them as that 13-year-old, as Mark, right? And so they're listening for, can you say some things that you accurately can say, I see your child. I care about them. I believe in their potential. No matter where they're at right now, you have to convey that they are where they are right now. And they may not be where they need to be, but you got to throw in there yet, but you got to then follow that up with, but I believe we can get there, right? So you have to keep putting messages out there around how you're noticing and seeing, caring for, and what you're trying. So I wanted to say one piece around kind of parent, because there was times when there were just parents that I just could not reach for a variety of reasons. And I had a colleague say to me, so even if there was no parents in the picture, Mark, we still as a school have them all day long. What are we doing with that, right? So it's both and. But in terms of what's within my sphere of influence, I'm not going to stay stuck in just saying I have to own, like I can't get started until I get quote unquote parents on board. And then what's my assumption about what parent on board means? The second I just wanted to quickly say is around, I think around the students, like, the chat went down pretty far, but there was something about getting students to kind of invest in it and shifting their mindset. And a good change strategy is helping students have small wins and make those connections between the work that they put in and the result that they got from it. The work that they put in, so it wasn't like a mystery, no magic. They're not good or bad at something that they actually, so giving them opportunities to be successful, give them opportunities to have indications of wins, and then holding that mirror back up to where they then can get meta around how do you think you arrived at that, versus us just keep telling them the good job and cheering them on. We can still do that, but actually say, hey, Column, how do you think that, right? And so once they do the thing they think they couldn't do, then their mindset shifts versus trying to talk their way into just shifting their mindset. A little both and. You have to have a narrative. You have to believe and say some stuff, act different ways, but they need wins and successes. And it's not just, I'm going to hit this benchmark in 3 weeks. And if I don't hit the benchmark, then you can tell me all kinds of stuff all day long about mindset. I ain't doing it no more, Mr. Salinas. So it's both and. You hold the rigor, you hold the benchmark and all that. And what's the trajectory of steps and wins that that student needs if you know mindset around, if I put in the effort, it ain't going to work, Mr. Salinas. If I actually try, I'm going to fail. So you actually give them opportunities to not fail, to be successful. And then more importantly, how'd you get there? What did you do differently?
Yeah, we've seen it definitely. A lot of teachers start with those individual students and then start to have practices where they're guiding all the students through a similar process about how you got good at something, et cetera. And we appreciate, there's a comment here about, from an instructional coach for a number of years, found that having teacher peer observations about how teachers interact with students can be extremely helpful when reflecting on your practice. So this framework and actually using a focal student approach is something we've seen not just individual teachers, but collaborative teams, professional learning communities, departments, grade levels can actually support people to kind of give thought partnership to each other about what might be going on with that student and how do we actually check our own mindsets, check our own ways of thinking about this, and support some new ideas about how to approach this student, and therefore what does that tell us about what other students might benefit from these approaches as well. So we're just about at the final few minutes. So we thank you for all of your engagement. Again, you will be getting the slides, the recording, the transcript of the chat, as well as some resources of the Learning Partnership Framework itself and a couple of others that we hope you'll find valuable. And we want to be clear that we have more that you can connect to. This webinar is actually one of many offerings of our Center for Equity Leadership. And that's really the part of our organization where, rather than us going out to schools and districts, they're coming across contexts to something we're hosting: webinars, professional development events, leadership fellowship program, and more. And we want to specifically highlight a few professional development events. Someone had a question about the upcoming Coaching for Equity, a Focal Student Approach. That's a 2-day institute in Oakland, January 17th and 18th. And this is the one that's most connected to what we've offered today. There's actually a full day on going deeper into the Learning Partnership Framework itself, understanding what teachers needs to happen between teachers and students to ensure that every student gets what they need. And then the second day is really about some foundations of a coaching approach that can actually coach teachers or support colleagues, even if you don't have to be a coach, a teacher, leader, principal, whoever you may be, working with other teachers to say, how can we support people's learning and shifting practices or trying new practices using this focal student approach and guided by the Learning Partnership Framework. So that's the most connected to what we offer today, but there are other offerings as well. 2-day in earlier January, 10th and 11th, on designing and facilitating meetings for equity for anyone who is charged with creating agendas and working with groups of people on equity-focused collaboration and learning. A little bit of how we have done that over the past 20 years and learning from one another in those sessions. And then what we consider our signature offering is the Leading for Equity Institute. It's a residential, usually, in case there are several opportunities in both California and Illinois this spring, a residential institute where teams of people from a school, district, or organization, a small team comes together to explore together the larger social political context we're in, how we've been shaped by that, and actually how that impacts our work together in understanding what equity issues are and how we actually talk about and work toward addressing those as a team. And we also want to be sure to mention the Black Teacher Project is an organization that's been around for a few years, and this year they're doing their amazing work actually within the National Equity Project's Center for Equity Leadership. And so there are a variety of offerings specifically for Black teachers and educators for affinity spaces, racial affinity spaces, to offer support, a Black Teacher Leadership Sustainability Institute in June. So please do check out those, especially for Black educators who may be connected to this webinar today, about what else you might be interested in checking out. So that's just a few. You can check out our website for much more. And we're going to say thank you. We really appreciate your engagement on the chat. You're taking the time out of your day to engage in this. This is just obviously scratching the surface of something that can go a lot further, but we hope you got something meaningful out of it. And if you have any interest in exploring the possibility of working with NEP, NEP partnering with your organization, you can email info@nationalequityproject.org for more information. Anything else you'd add?
Yeah, so over this break, we really encourage you to take care of yourself. That self-care, and you deserve it. We thank you for what you do, and really think that we have to take care of ourselves in this work, because we're in it for a marathon. There's no simple solutions and no shortcuts. And this work takes a toll on us. And it's not about like how down are you, but actually can we sustain ourselves in the work. So take care of yourself, be with those loved ones, those pets. And if any of those educators that you brought to mind earlier are still alive, send them a note, send them an email, a text, call them if they're still around. It would make a world of difference and an awesome break. You know, I don't want to just say holiday. We don't all celebrate that over the break. Just let them know you were thinking about them on this beautiful day.
All right, with that, please take good care of yourselves and each other, and we hope to connect with you another time. Thanks for being here today.
See y'all later.